The Wild West, a time when justice came from the barrel of a gun and legends were born in bloodshed. And when it comes to Wild West legends, one name stands out above the rest: Billy the Kid. They say he helped 21 men permanently unsubscribe from life before he was 21 years old himself. But I mean, that real number is probably closer to 8 or 9. But hey, let's not let facts get in the way of a good story, right? He was only 5'7" with a smooth face that made him look younger than his years. And so Henry McCarty, that was his real name, didn't exactly look like the part of a stone-cold killer. But as we all know, looks can be deceiving. By the time he was gunned down at 21, this baby-faced outlaw had escaped from jail twice, fought in a range war, and become the most wanted man in the New Mexico territory. His legend grew so big that we are still talking and arguing about him 150 years later. So was he a cold-blooded killer who got what was coming to him? Was he a misunderstood kid who just got caught up in the corrupt politics of the New Mexico territory? Or do you think he was something in between? A product of his violent times who has played the cards he was dealt the best way he knew how. So what turned this New York City kid into the most famous outlaw in American history? And why are we still telling his story all these years later? It's time to separate the fact from fiction as we dive into the short but explosive life of Billy the Kid. Warning: the following video is meant for educational purposes only and should not be taken otherwise. Apex Crime Lords does not condone, encourage, or glorify the actions of the individuals covered in this program. Viewer discretion is advised. The most famous outlaw of the American West wasn't even born in the West. Henry McCarty came into this world in a New York City Irish slum in 1859. His parents were Catherine and Patrick McCarty. They were Irish immigrants trying to carve out a place in America. Little Henry's dad checked out early, either by taking a dirt nap or just hitting the road. Nobody's really quite sure. So that leaves Catherine raising Henry and his brother Joseph all by herself. And like a lot of single mothers looking for a fresh start, Catherine decided to head west. The family bounced around Indiana and Kansas before landing in Silver City, New Mexico territory in the early 1870s. And along the way, Catherine married a guy named William Antrim, which gave young Henry a stepfather and a new last name. But now don't go thinking this was some happy Brady Bunch situation. Antrim wasn't exactly Father of the Year material. He was more interested in prospecting and gambling than raising another man's kids. Then tragedy struck again. In 1874, Catherine lost her battle with tuberculosis. Henry McCarty was just 14 years old. Now sometimes he was going by Henry Antrim. At this point, he was basically on his own. His stepfather couldn't be bothered to stick around and raise him. So Henry took whatever odd jobs he could find. He was a dishwasher, ranch hand, anything to keep food in his belly. But when you got a teenage boy with no family and no prospects in the Wild West, that's a recipe for trouble. And trouble found young Henry pretty quick. His first run-in with the law came in September of 1875. He was arrested for stealing some clothes and a pair of pistols. As it turns out, breaking into a Chinese laundry wasn't the kid's brightest idea. But his first stay behind bars didn't last long. He squeezed his skinny butt up a chimney and made his getaway. The jailbreak established a pattern that would follow him for the rest of his short life. Get into trouble, get locked up, escape, and then repeat. After fleeing Silver City, McCarty drifted into Arizona territory, where he fell in with a horse thief named John Mackey. They stole horses from the local cavalry and then sold them back to make a quick buck. That's just a smart business model right there. Around this time, Henry picked up a new nickname. Because of his small size and smooth face, plus a couple of buck teeth, people started calling him Kid, or sometimes Kid Antrim. But the kid's Arizona adventure came to an abrupt end in August of 1877. A local blacksmith named Francis Windy Cahill had been bullying the kid for months. During a poker game, Cahill jumped him again, throwing him to the ground and slapping him around. But this time, the kid was not having it. He pulled out a pistol and put a bullet in Cahill's belly. The blacksmith ended up pushing up the daisies, and the kid was now wanted for helping someone get their face on a milk carton. So he fled back to New Mexico, where he got himself a new name, and he found himself in the middle of what amounted to a full-scale war. Back in New Mexico, the kid headed to Lincoln County, a place so wild that even by Wild West standards, it stood out. Lincoln County wasn't just a place on the map. It was a powder keg waiting for a match. And our boy Billy, he was about to bring the heat. Lincoln County was basically owned by two guys, Lawrence Murphy and James Dolan. These guys ran what folks called the house. It was a store that had a monopoly on everything, from cattle contracts to banking. If you lived in Lincoln County, you either played by the house's rules or you got crushed. So now let's bring in John Tunstall. He was a young English businessman with big dreams and deep pockets. Tunstall set up a rival store and bank, breaking the house's monopoly. He also started recruiting small ranchers and cowboys who were tired of getting squeezed by Murphy and Dolan. And one of those cowboys was our boy Henry. Except now he was going by the name William H. Bonney, although folks were already starting to call him Billy the Kid. Tunstall wasn't just an employer to Billy. He was like a father figure that the kid really never had. Tunstall gave him some honest work, treated him with respect, and saw potential in this scrawny kid with a troubled past. So maybe for the first time in his life, Billy had found someone who believed in him. But in February of 1878, everything went sideways. A posse made up of Dolan's men, operating under the questionable authority of the sheriff, confronted Tunstall on the road. The details of this are a little murky, but the results were clear. John Tunstall took a bullet to the head. He had been sent to meet his maker. And just like that, the match hit the powder keg. The Lincoln County War had begun. And Billy, he wasn't just a participant, he became one of its main fighters. Tunstall's supporters, which of course included Billy, formed a vigilante group called the Regulators. The official mission was to bring Tunstall's killers to justice through legal means, and they actually got themselves deputized by a local justice of the peace. But I mean, let's be real, they were out for blood. The Regulators tracked down two of the men involved in Tunstall's death. That was Frank Baker and William Morton. Both men ended up wearing wooden onesies while allegedly trying to escape. Yeah, that old story. On April 1st, 1878, the Regulators caught up with Lincoln County Sheriff William Brady, a guy who was firmly in the house's back pocket. Brady and his deputy were walking down the main street of Lincoln when the Regulators opened fire from behind an adobe wall. Both men took several bullets and walked over the Rainbow Bridge. Billy was right in the thick of it, and witnesses said he personally helped Sheriff Brady vacate this earthly meat prison. The kid had now crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. He helped a lawman cash in his chips, and even in the Wild West, that was a big deal. And things just kept escalating. In July of 1878, the Regulators found themselves in a 5-day shootout with Dolan's men at Tunstall's store. This wasn't just some quick gunfight. This was a siege. You got bullets flying, buildings burning. The whole town of Lincoln was turned into a war zone. When the smoke cleared, several more men had popped their clogs, and the Regulators were scattered. The Lincoln County War eventually sputtered out, but not before transforming Billy from just another cowboy into a notorious outlaw. With a price on his head for Sheriff Brady's death, the kid went from being a regulator to a fugitive. The legend of Billy the Kid was only just beginning. By 1879, Billy the Kid wasn't just an outlaw. He was becoming a folk hero to some of the small ranchers and Mexican-American residents of New Mexico. They saw him as standing up to corrupt officials and big business interests. The kid spent the next year doing what outlaws do. You rustle cattle, gamble, lay low when you have to, and occasionally helping another unfortunate soul move to the great beyond when the situation called for it. Now, what made Billy different from your average outlaw wasn't his ruthlessness or even his skill with a gun. It was his personality. By all accounts, the kid could be as charming as he wanted to be. He spoke fluent Spanish, he loved to dance, and he made friends easily. And even the ladies seemed to like this guy, even despite those famous buck teeth he had. He was known for his sense of humor and almost constant smile. Even some of the lawmen who were chasing him couldn't help but like the guy when they got to know him. One of the men chasing Billy was the newly appointed Lincoln County Sheriff, Pat Garrett. He was tall, serious, and determined, and Garrett was actually an old friend of Billy's. These guys had gambled together, they drank together, and maybe even rustled a cattle or two back in the day. But now Garrett had gone straight. He had gotten married and pinned on a badge. Now his job was bringing in his former drinking buddy, dead or alive. In December of 1880, Garrett and his posse captured Billy and some of his gang at a place called Stinking Springs. The kid was finally headed to trial for the killing of Sheriff Brady, and after a short trial in Mesilla, New Mexico, Billy was found guilty of murder and sentenced to hang. He was transferred to Lincoln so he could wait for his execution. They put him in a room in the courthouse with armed guards watching him 24/7. And if there's one thing the kid was good at, besides shooting and smiling, it was escaping. On April 28, 1881, while being held in the Lincoln County Courthouse, Billy made his boldest escape yet. Now, exactly how he got his hands on a gun is still debated, but one way or another, he got his hands on a pistol. When one of the guards, J.W. Bell, took him to the outhouse, Billy surprised him. He put a bullet in him and had Bell buying the farm. He went back to the courthouse and confronted his other guard, Bob Olinger. Olinger, who had been tormenting Billy for days, was across the street having dinner when he heard the shot that took out Bell. He ran back to the courthouse, only to find Billy waiting for him at an upstairs window with Olinger's own shotgun. "Hello, Bob," Billy reportedly said with that famous smile. Then he pulled both triggers, helping Olinger get his own roadside shrine made out of 2x4s. Billy quickly busted out of those chains. He grabbed a horse and rode out of Lincoln, supposedly singing along the way as he went. It was one of the most dramatic jailbreaks in American history, and it only added to the kid's growing legend. But of course, freedom wouldn't last long for Billy the Kid. Sheriff Garrett was still on his trail, more determined than ever to bring him in. After his escape, Billy headed to Fort Sumner, a former military post turned small settlement in eastern New Mexico. Fort Sumner was Billy's kind of place. He had friends there, including a girlfriend named Paulita Maxwell. But now, of course, Garrett knew this as well. He heard rumors that the kid was hanging around Fort Sumner. In the night of July 14, 1881, Garrett and two deputies rode quietly into Fort Sumner. There are different stories about what happened next. Garrett claims he went to Pete Maxwell's house and asked about the kid's whereabouts. While they were talking in Maxwell's darkened bedroom, who should walk in but Billy himself, allegedly carrying a knife and a revolver. The kid spotted someone in the dark, but didn't recognize Garrett. "¿Quién es? ¿Quién es?" he asked in Spanish. And by the way, that means, "Who is it?" These were supposedly his last words. Garrett drew his revolver and fired twice. One bullet hit the wall. The other hit Billy the Kid in the chest, right above the heart. He fell back, gasped a few times, and then that was it. No final words, no dramatic speech, no last shootout. Just a 21-year-old outlaw lying dead on a dirt floor in the dark. Billy the Kid, born Henry McCarty, also known as William H. Bonney, got his face on a t-shirt the next day in the Fort Sumner Cemetery. Pat Garrett would go on to write a somewhat embellished account of his pursuit of the kid, helping to turn the young outlaw into an even bigger legend. And over the years, that legend would only grow. In the immediate aftermath of his death, Billy the Kid was just another outlaw who'd met the inevitable end of most outlaws in the Wild West. The New York Times called him one of the most desperate murderers of this desperate border. But something interesting happened as the years went by. The story of Billy the Kid took on a life of its own. Dime novels and sensationalist newspaper articles transformed him from a small-time rustler who killed a few men into a legendary gunslinger who supposedly sent 21 men to trip the light fantastic, one for each year of his life. By the early 1900s, the first movies about Billy started appearing, and they haven't stopped since. He's been portrayed by everyone from Paul Newman to Emilio Estevez to Val Kilmer. Something about this baby-faced outlaw captured America's imagination and never let go. Maybe it's because his story has a little bit of everything that makes the Wild West fascinating. You got gunfights, jailbreaks, betrayal, revenge, a dramatic death at the hands of a former friend. Or maybe it's because Billy the Kid represents something uniquely American. A nobody from nowhere who made sure the whole world knew his name, even if it was for all the wrong reasons. Over time, the view of Billy has shifted. He went from being seen as a cold-blooded killer to something more complex. a product of his violent times, a loyal friend, a man who lived by his own code in a place where the law was just another tool to be used by the powerful. Some even saw him as a folk hero who stood up for the little guy against corrupt officials and greedy businessmen. The truth, as usual, is probably somewhere in the middle. Billy wasn't the devil of early accounts, but now he wasn't the Robin Hood of later romanticized versions either. He was just a young man making his way in the violent world the best way he knew how. Was he the cold-blooded killer who helped 21 men permanently retire? Yeah, definitely not. That real number is probably closer to 8 or 9, and at least a few of those were in self-defense or during his time as a regulator. But now, was he just an innocent kid caught up in circumstances beyond his control? Yeah, that doesn't make sense either. Billy made choices, and sometimes they were bad ones, and that led him down the outlaw trail. Now, what we do know is that in his short 21 years, William H. Bonney created a legend that has endured for nearly a century and a half. For better or worse, Billy the Kid has become one of the most enduring symbols of the American West. He was a skinny kid with a big gun and an even bigger smile, and now he's forever frozen in time as a young outlaw who lived fast, died young, and left a good-looking corpse, or at least a famous one. Even after his death, Billy the Kid keeps stirring up trouble. For decades, people have been claiming that Billy didn't actually die that night in Fort Sumner. They say that Garrett shot someone else and let the real kid escape. Some folks like Brushy Bill Roberts from Hico, Texas, even claimed to be the real Billy the Kid, saying that he lived to a ripe old age. Brushy Bill popped up in the 1950s, claiming he was the kid and asking for a pardon from the governor of New Mexico. He died before his claims could be thoroughly investigated, but most historians think he was just another colorful character trying to grab some fame. And then there's the photo controversy. For years, only one authenticated photo of Billy the Kid existed. A tintype showing him with a cocky stance, wearing a hat with his rifle at his side. That photo sold at an auction in 2011 for a cool $2.3 million. But now in recent years, other alleged photos of the kid have surfaced. Some have been debunked, others remain controversial. One photo supposedly shows Billy playing croquet with his regulator pals. If authentic, it would be worth millions. And so, the debate rages on. Then there's the pardon controversy. In his final days, Billy was supposedly promised a pardon by New Mexico Territorial Governor Lew Wallace in exchange for testimony in a murder case. Billy had held up his end, but Wallace never came through with the pardon. In 2010, the then governor at the time, Bill Richardson, considered a posthumous pardon for the kid, which stirred up a hornet's nest of controversy. Some descendants of Sheriff Brady and his deputies strongly objected. Others thought it was a fitting resolution to a raw deal. In the end, Richardson decided against the pardon, leaving Billy the Outlaw until the end of time. And then finally there's the most basic question of all. Was Billy the Kid a hero or a villain? The answer probably depends on who you ask and when you ask them. To the powerful interest in 1880s New Mexico, he was definitely the bad guy. To the small ranchers who were being squeezed out by cattle companies, maybe he was fighting on the right side. To modern Americans raised on movies and TV shows about the Wild West, he's just another fascinating character from a time that seems simpler, but it was probably a whole lot harder than we imagine. Next time on Apex Crime Lords, we're heading to New York City to tell the story of Tommy Lucchese, one of the most influential and least known bosses of the American Mafia. From his early days as a teenage gangster to becoming head of one of the 5 families, Lucchese operated in the shadows while other mob bosses made headlines. So how did a 5'2" Sicilian immigrant with only 8 fingers rise to control unions, garment factories, and even Hollywood studios? And why was he called Three-Finger Brown, despite missing 2 fingers, not 1? Don't miss this fascinating look at the Silent Don, who built one of the most profitable criminal enterprises in American history, and he did this while staying off law enforcement's radar for decades. Tune in to learn how Tommy Lucchese wrote the playbook for organized crime that's still being followed today. Billy the Kid lived fast, died young, and left a story that's been told and retold for nearly 150 years. Not bad for a skinny kid from the New York slums who never saw his 22nd birthday. His actual criminal career lasted just a few years, but his legend has endured for generations. He wasn't the deadliest gunslinger of the Old West, and he wasn't the most successful outlaw or the most notorious criminal, but something about his story. Maybe it's the tragic arc, maybe it's embodiment of youth cut short, maybe just the catchy nickname. For some reason, his story has kept us fascinated all these years later. In a lot of ways, Billy's life was a series of what-ifs. What if his father hadn't died or disappeared? What if his mother hadn't died when he was 14? What if John Tunstall, the only positive male influence in his life, hadn't been gunned down? What if Governor Wallace had kept his promise of a pardon? We, my friends, will never know. All we know is that a young man named Henry McCarty blazed across the New Mexico territory like a shooting star, bright and fast and gone too soon. And in dying young, he achieved something most of us never will. A kind of immortality, not of flesh and blood, but in books and movies and songs and stories. The kid rides on, forever young, forever wild, forever embodying the spirit of a time and a place that's long gone, but never forgotten. Now, how do you think Billy the Kid should be remembered? Was he a cold-blooded killer who got what was coming to him? Or was he a victim of circumstances who never really had a chance? Or is it something more complex? A young guy making his way through a violent world the best way he knew how? Well, that's up for you to decide. Let us know what you're thinking in the comments section below. And if you like these episodes, how about hitting that subscribe button? Really helps us out. Until next time, stay safe and stay dangerous.